Let's do one more what if to round out the off-season content here on Locked On Pacers. Looking back at the end of the Paul George era, what if the Pacers did different trades to exit the PG era? We'll talk about it today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers as always. My name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and the Westside Community News, and today we're going to do our fourth and final what if for this month of August. We've already talked about the Pacers trading away Kawhi Leonard, what life could have looked like if that didn't happen, what would have happened if Josh McRoberts may not have had attempted the shot at the end of the perfect quarter, the NBA's only perfect quarter. What if Jack McKinney did get in a bicycle accident in 1979 and then trade away the pick that could have become Michael Jordan for the Pacers? Today, we will close it out by looking at the end of the Paul George era, specifically trades the Pacers did not make around the end of that time. Two, I want to talk about, one with the Celtics, one with the Lakers, and one the Pacers would have kept Paul George and traded for Anthony Davis. Lots of history going on today, even though it's more recent history. Tomorrow on Locked On Pacers, final player interview of the month. I got an ex-player, didn't ever play for the Pacers, but a former top 5 pick to talk about Rick Carlisle, the job he will have to do coaching this team this year. We also talked about Ben Mathurin and what it's like being a top pick. So that'll be really cool coming this week. And then we'll pivot to previewing the coming season content when September starts on the 1st. So lots of fun stuff coming here on Locked On Pacers. Let's dive right into this what if. Let's go back in time to context. Paul George, via Aaron Mintz, says in the summer of 2017, hey, look, I'll play out the season with you guys, Pacers, but I'm out after that, right? Aaron Mintz was his agent at the time. They told the Pacers that he would not be re-signing with them when his contract expires in a year, specifically saying, per Woj at the time, of the Vertical, throwback to the Vertical, the pillar of Yahoo Sports, that he would like to join the Lakers. He's from South California, perfect place for him, and was thinking Lakers. So the context at the time was Paul George likely to stick with the Pacers for a season and then go to the Lakers. And a lot of the reporting suggested that teams considered he was a rental, which made it harder for the Pacers to trade him. Even more so at that time, but going back during the season, Larry Bird was actually the president. That context matters a little bit as we talk here, but at that time it wasn't as known that he would be leaving as it was near the June time, near the draft and near free agency when Kevin Pritchard was in charge. So we'll start with the Lakers, the team that he reportedly wanted to go to, and ultimately, the thought of the Lakers being scared was a big factor here, which was interesting because they had the number 2 pick in the upcoming draft, which turned out to be Lonzo Ball. They had Brandon Ingram on their team. They had some other interesting young guys at that time, the number 27 and 28 pick in the upcoming draft. And it felt like they had a decent offer to put on the table, but they weren't willing to, partially because they thought they could get him in free agency in a year. And I think it's interesting when I was doing research for this to read back a lot of the reporting from reporters who were like, the Lakers have to consider how risky they're willing to be in this, because what if another team swoops in with an offer and gets Paul George, and then he falls in love with the culture of that team and stays? And that's exactly what ended up happening. The Thunder, he fell in love with Russell Westbrook and Clay Bennett there and stayed in OKC with his ginormous contract. And that team didn't amount to much, but he ended up staying and then being traded to the Clippers, right? Never ended up playing for the Lakers. So interesting that it ended up going that way after reading all this stuff about it, because the Lakers were the team that, in theory, should have been in the lead. They had decent enough pieces between a number 2 great pick in Brandon Ingram, who I'm sure the Pacers would have loved to get at the time, and then a number 2 pick that had not been picked yet that turned out to be Lonzo Ball, which is interesting because during the season, if you told me at the trade deadline they were offering that, I get why the Pacers would have turned that down. They probably thought at that time they could have kept PG through the rest of his contract into his next deal. Him and Bird had a relationship, right? And so maybe I get why they wouldn't have done that then. And then Pritchard is a guy who mostly likes the under contract young players with team control that they can kind of build around and grow and things like that. And so if Ingram was off the table, even if the number 2 pick was on the table, he might not have accepted that because he would have rather had Ingram. So it's interesting to look at how who was in charge mattered at the time of what the offer would have been, because Ingram already was looking pretty good as a rookie. It's unlikely he would have been in an offer for PG at that time anyway, especially with the looming prospect 1 year from now that the Lakers could, and they did, get LeBron James. So it's interesting to think about all the moving parts and factors of this that we're saying whoever was in charge likely wanted different things. Either way, going back to what this Lakers offer was reportedly, again, the thing about these leaks is it's a lot easier for teams to say what they offered after the fact and they didn't get a guy because they go, oh, look how dumb this team is. Or it's just easier for stuff to leak when stuff doesn't happen, or it leaks a little differently or maybe slightly off from what was really reported. But either way, the baseline reported from ESPN, I think it was Mark Stein and Ramona Shelburne, was something like Julius Randle, who at the time was a quality young player. You know, he went number 7 in the draft not long before that. The pick 27 and pick 28 in the upcoming 2017 draft. So at the time, Julius Randle was a 2-year pro. He got injured in his first year, only played a game. Had a nice second year, started 60 games, averaged 11 points and 10 rebounds a game, like a double-double guy as a rookie. He would go on to be an all-star. Julius Randle's had a nice career, but wasn't thought of like in an amazing light. Was not thought of as one of the best Laker youngsters with the number 2 pick coming in with Ingram on the team. So yes, he was good. Top 7 pick is good. Like he was a fine player, but not thought of in like a super highlight at the time. But he is sort of a Kevin Pritchard-esque asset in that he was 2 more years under contract before restricted free agency, just averaged a double-double, like could be a quality piece, would fit with Miles Turner, who they had as a young guy at the time. Like, in theory, he was high value to the Pacers. And then the other stuff on top of him was pick 27 and pick 28. Those 2 picks turned out to be Kyle Kuzma, who was good, and Tony Bradley, who was not. So interesting in retrospect that package actually ends up looking okay. Julius Randle, one-time All-Star, has had some good years in the league, right? In the last 4 years of the league, like I think Julius Randle, a 21 and 10 guy basically over the last 4 years. And there's a lot of problems in that with efficiency and defense and fitting into a team construct, and he can't shoot. Like, I understand why he's not a high value player, but he is good. Like he's a fine player in the NBA ranks. I think that would have been an okay package, even in retrospect, for Paul George, who was already out the door. That said, I think a key context point, I'm going to discuss this with the Celtics in the second segment as well, is this better than what the Pacers ultimately did? And it's so funny to have the benefit of hindsight on this one because, a lot of people thought that at the time, many of you listening maybe didn't think this way, but my recollection is most fans at the time thought the Celtics had the best reported offers. The Lakers had the second best reported offers, and some other teams, like Kevin Love was discussed. The Wizards had some stuff in there, like were a little bit better than the Lakers stuff, and the Lakers had the worst stuff. And what ended up happening was the Pacers traded him to the Thunder, obviously, as everybody knows, for Victor Oladipo and Domantas Sabonis. And everybody immediately thought, wait, there has to be a pick in there. There's no way, because I remember the reaction right away being, oh, they should have just done the Lakers thing instead, right? They should have taken the 2 firsts and Julius Randle instead of what they actually got, the All-Star season of Victor Oladipo. That ended up happening right away. He became a 2-time All-Star. Sabonis was a 2-time All-Star, right? Obviously, it worked out. That trade was really good. It's still going to last a long time in terms of the domino effect for the Pacers. They now have Halliburton, who they got from Sabonis. They had LeVert, who turned into maybe a first from that. Still, like that, the dominoes are still going there. But even just looking at the most direct things that they got, they did better, right? They ended up doing better with Sabonis and Vic than they would have had they taken the Randle and 2 first package, which is fascinating at the time because that's one of the ones that even people considered poor at the time with the Lakers package. Fans were like, oh, that's not good enough. It was better perceived than Depot and Sabonis, even though it ended up being worse. So it's interesting that, with the benefit of hindsight, that is not better because it was considered to be the worst offer. So interesting to think about this one because of the Lakers' stance, right? They came in and they said, oh, we think we can get him in a year. And this could be a lesson to every NBA team, including the Pacers potentially in any future setting. Like, you never truly know with these rentals. Sometimes it's worth betting on your own team, or sometimes it's worth, if you're a team thinking a guy who could come to you, just get him. Just get the good players. Like, it's going to often work out to get good players on your basketball team. The Raptors won a title this way. The Thunder got to keep Paul George in this way, right? This is a good lesson to everyone in this exercise of what can happen. It doesn't always work out, but it can work out. And I think teams get a little too skittish at times, and it turns out to go in the Pacers' favor because the Lakers never, at least we don't know this, I suppose, but they didn't end up agreeing to a trade with the Lakers and ended up doing something that worked out very well for the franchise in retrospect. Let's also talk about the Celtics part of this because they were very in on Paul George, according to a lot of reporting, again from ESPN and a bunch of other places. It was actually very hard for me to figure out what their exact offer was because there was a million people who reported slightly different variations. But let's cover the Celtics portion of what this could have looked like for the Pacers. Before we do that, a quick message from the NHTSA. Are you one of those people who thinks it's okay to drive stoned? What's the worst that can happen? You end up driving below the speed limit? It's no big deal, right? Wrong. The truth is your reaction time slows way down when you're high. You not only put yourself in danger, but everyone around you. Talk about a buzzkill. Stop kidding yourself. It's not okay to drive high. If you've been using marijuana in any form, do not get behind a wheel. If you feel different, you drive different, drive high, get a DUI. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. Hey, for your second listen, why not hop on over to Locked On Lakers, hear what they're talking about after they traded for Patrick Beverley early in this past week. Traded away Talen Horton-Tucker, potentially a piece who could have been in a Pacers deal? Question mark. We'll talk about that later this week, actually, because I think that is noteworthy. But yes, that is a key show to go to right now, Locked On Lakers. So let's talk about the second strongly reported team. Look, I think the Lakers and Celtics, in retrospect, were the two teams. The Cavs, too, because of Kevin Love, but they didn't have any interesting assets. And there was like some smoke about Kyrie for PG, but that was never real. The Celtics part of this, they were another team with heavy interest in PG. And this one is tough to track down because there were a lot of Boston reporters reporting some different things about what the reported PG offer was. But the Celtics at the time, for your history lesson, young Jaylen Brown, young Jason Tatum, they have some future Nets picks still in tow, and they just won 53 games. 53 games. Good-looking team. Isaiah Thomas is killing it for them. They've got those two young guys, like I just said, Avery Bradley, Jay Crowder, Al Horford was ascending for them. They were great. They were a really good team at the time. Adding PG to the mix would have made them awesome. So the thinking was, okay, they have all these extra picks from the Nets, and they had actually an extra one from the Kings as well, that they could be a really threatening team to acquire PG. Right? He would fit well in what they already have. They would be a title contender. They just won 53 games. Why not go get Paul George? So they were a team that was heavily linked because they had the right stuff. They were at the right time of a build. And if you'll recall, look, first of all, Danny Ainge, notorious for his negotiating tactics after the fact, saying, I was close to dating this guy, things like that. He is a hard negotiator. He is a tricky negotiator. But the Celtics are at an interesting time, and I think this is an interesting team-building thing to think about as well for any team, including the Pacers going forward, is they were trying to do something that's really hard to do, I think. And that is, they had all these young players like Tatum and Brown and young assets that they could be good in the future. And they were also trying to be good right now. They had Isaiah Thomas. They had Al Horford. So they tried to kind of do both things, right? Once Brad Stevens came in, he had that first year where they won 25 games, and then they were trying to do both at once. And it's kind of worked. Like if you look through their history, like they had that 500 year 2 years ago in the COVID year. But in general, it's worked. Like they were good, and then they got a little worse, and they got right back good again. But they haven't. They only made the conference finals twice. They lost in both of them. Like in theory, you'd think maybe they and they still could. They made the finals this past year, obviously. But in theory, you thought maybe they would try to be a finals team in that first mix. So maybe this could work out for them. But then if they don't win a championship, it'll be interesting to think about. Would they have regrets about not trying to be good at the front of this versus now? But again, they've had success. Like I think I just sold it short. The Celtics have been very good the last 5 years. I just sold short the success that they've had. I just think it's tricky to kind of go down both paths, even if they did figure out a way to do it. I would be interested to see what it looked like if they went all in for like a 2-year span of that time, is what I'm saying. Either way, they were trying to do the two path things at once. And so this is another situation where it matters who was in charge of the Pacers at the time, because around the draft time, when the Pacers actually traded Paul George, which was June 28th or 27th of that summer, to the Thunder, the reported offers from ESPN, I think it was Jeff Goodman who I was reading this one from, doing this research, and then someone from the Boston Globe, Gary Washburn, at the time, was 3 firsts and 2 quality starters from the Celtics to the Pacers, was the offer. And none of those firsts were Nets firsts, which is key to note here. So the best possible thing, looking back at what the Celtics had at that time, would have been one first from the Memphis Grizzlies, one first from the Sacramento Kings, and then one first from the Celtics themselves. And so, assuming the best possible scenario for what those picks could have been, the Pacers trade would have been, and the best starters, because one was reported to be Jay Crowder, the other one was an unknown starter from the Celtics. Some reported it could have been Tyler Zeller, others said Avery Bradley. Again, let's assume the best possible package to discuss this scenario. So, assuming the best possible picks in retrospect and the best players, that trade for Paul George would have been Jay Crowder and Avery Bradley, along with the picks that became Aaron Nesmith, ironic, Romeo Langford, and Matisse Thybulle for Paul George. That turns out to be pretty bad, right? Like the value of those picks not being Nets picks was not that high for the Pacers. And I also understand looking at that one because that trade offer was made with Kevin Pritchard running the show. And Kevin Pritchard is, as we've seen with all the trades he likes to make, likes to get young players under contract for a long time that the Pacers can grow around or put in the right places to succeed. That's how they got TJ Warren. That's how they got Malcolm Brogdon. That's how they got Depot, Sabonis, Tyrese Halliburton, Karis LeVert even. It's very rare that he has deviated in his significant trades from that ideology. And I think in the Pacers small market situation, that is a very, very good ideology. That's a good way of thinking. He's not a picks first kind of guy. And in the Brogdon trade, that's the biggest trade I think where he really didn't go fully in on that. Right, they kind of went away from that a little bit, unless they really believe in Nesmith, and maybe they do. They didn't get a ton of value in that one in the same way they have in some of these other bigger trades. Either way, that has usually been his MO in these sorts of trades. So the appeal at the time, and this was, I think, again, my memory serving me correctly, a lot of Pacers fans' favorite offer, if they had to trade PG, was to the Celtics for this thing of picks. And most Pacers fans wanted either a high pick from the Lakers, that number 2 pick, Ingram, or a high pick, one of the Nets picks from the Celtics. That is true. And I don't know if any of those were offered myself, but going on reporting, it doesn't seem like any of those were offered in any sort of strong way. So the appeal of this package was the number of picks, 3 first rounders. That was not there from the Lakers, who were reportedly only offering 2 on top of Randall. Those 2 starters had some value. Remember, Jay Crowder was on one of the best contracts in the NBA at the time. Avery Bradley was viewed as a good player still then. Like, this is a pretty strong package at the time. And again, they just won 53 games with those 2 guys as a starter. This was a good trade offer. And yet, it does not stand the test of time. I think this kind of speaks to how well the Pacers did in this trade, is that even thinking back on what this was, 3 first rounders is a lot of first round picks, as well as Jay Crowder, who's still good, and Avery Bradley, who's still in the league. I mean, those 2 vets aren't that impressive, but that's like a lot of value to give up in a trade. And that still does not hold a candle to what the Pacers actually ended up getting for PG in terms of Vic and Domas. So the what if of this exercise is, what if they took the Lakers package or the Celtics package that was offered around the same time as the Depot trade was made? They'd have been worse. The Pacers would have been worse off. They would have either been in a situation where they were reliant on the draft if they took the Celtics offer, or reliant on Julius Randle. And this is a very roundabout 20-minute discussion to say that, wow, they actually might have, given the offers reported that were strong, made the right decision. Kevin Love, obviously not the right thing. If they could have gotten Kyrie, maybe that, again, is a thing. But I think of the strongly reported offers at the time, they made the best deal. Now, there was something else that I read out there that, again, there were a lot of people reporting different things. That when Bird was in charge of the trade deadline in 2017, the Celtics did offer that Nets pick swap in that draft. Now, if that's true, and the Pacers could have got that pick that ended up becoming number 1, that was the Fultz pick. Now, it was Fultz, so it wouldn't have worked out. If that's true, that maybe could have been better. I mean, that pick could have been Jason Tatum if they picked Tatum or whoever, but you never know who they would have picked. That's another what if game, and that's a problem with saying the draft pick part of it from any team. But that one maybe could have ended up better than Depot and Sabonis did, but they didn't do that. So I think that is the more interesting what if, is what if Larry Bird at the trade deadline, a whole year and a half advance, when the writing was a little on the wall, that team ended up winning 45 games and getting beaten by the Cavs, swept by the Cavs. If they had seen the writing on the wall before that and said, hey, let's trade Paul now, that maybe that would have been the strong move that would have set them up for the future better than what they did. But given their offers on the table, any what if about if they traded Paul George to this team or that team for a different package is pretty much they end up in a worse situation. They probably don't have Tyrese now because they traded Sabonis for him. So a lot of things did work out for them. But there is an alternative path of trades I would like to consider is that Paul George stays with the Pacers and they make a different trade. They trade for some other star to bring in. My least favorite thing of the last couple years is this discussion I'm about to have, but I want to talk about it in this context. Anthony Davis and Paul George teaming up on the Pacers. Let's talk about that. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day for your second listen. I just talked about the Celtics. Hop on over to Locked On Celtics. John Corrales will tell you about that team and the latest on Danilo Gallinari's injury, who got injured playing for Italy in the FIBA qualifiers that are going on right now with Eurobasket starting up this week. Okay, look, this came up in 2020, I think is when this first came out. Has been reported on by a lot of people since. Paul George on the All the Smoke podcast. I think that's hosted by Darius Miles and Jason Richardson. I cannot remember the other player. I should know that. Either way, Matt Barnes and Steven Jackson. I got the totally wrong show. Matt Barnes and Steven Jackson is All the Smoke. Anywhomst. Those two guys were interviewing Paul George, and he said that he had a top power forward who wanted to come to Indiana, but the Pacers were not willing to do it. They did not want to trade for a big market player, and he didn't name the player. It ended up that J. Michael reported it was Anthony Davis in the Star. He talked about it, and then Anthony Davis himself was asked about it and addressed it. And this is, I'm reading this in Bleacher Report, but Davis told the reporters the Paul thing in Indiana, it was a conversation for sure. It just kind of faded away. I'm not really sure what happened on their end. He said management didn't want to do it, whatever. That was from Ryan Ward, who initially reported that. So, yeah, okay, if you think about it like that, and we have confirmation that Paul George apparently had Anthony Davis' buy-in that he wanted to play for the Pacers. Cool. That's cool that Anthony Davis wanted to play for the Pacers. One problem, he was not a free agent. He was not even close to free agency. He had a couple years, 3 to 4 left on his deal at the time. So he can't just leave the Pelicans and come play for the Pacers. So this would have required a trade. Paul apparently told the Pacers about this, and they said, "Nah, we can't make that happen." Instead, well, we think maybe we can get this power forward. This is again going off of some old reporting at the time. So thinking back on that, thinking about an Anthony Davis trade in general, think about when Anthony Davis got traded for. Ultimately got traded for. Anthony Davis went to the Lakers for Lonzo Ball, Brandon Ingram, Josh Hart, the 4th overall pick that ended up getting flipped, 2 firsts additionally, and a pick swap, right? That was in 2019. That was when Anthony Davis was 26 years old, not 24, 26 years old. That is what he went for. If he truly did have any sort of desire to come to the Pacers in 2017, that's great for the Pacers. They could have thought about it. They can't beat that offer then or in 2019. They couldn't have gotten him. Why would David Griffin and the Celtics have even traded him? It makes no sense. They had just gotten DeMarcus Cousins themselves. Like, they were trying to ascend on their own end. They had some other promising pieces on their team. Like, why would they, after trading for Boogie, just go, nah, we're going to trade you away. We're going to trade you to the Pacers now. It doesn't make sense for them to do so, first of all, in their team content. Second of all, again, looking at the value the Pelicans got 2 full years later, it's still higher than anything the Pacers could have even reasonably sniffed at the time. What would that even have looked like? Let's go back in time. The summer of 2017 Pacers. Their roster at the time, at the end of the prior season. I'm going to run through all 15 names. I'm sorry if that's boring. Just to paint the picture of what Kevin Pritchard is dealing with. Lavoy Allen, Aaron Brooks, Rakeem Christmas, Monte Ellis, Paul George, Al Jefferson, CJ Miles, Georges Niang, Glenn Robinson III, Kevin Seraphin, Lance Stevenson, Rodney Stuckey, Jeff Teague, Miles Turner, Joe Young, and Thaddeus Young. 7 of those players were born after 1990. All the rest were 28 and older at the time. Paul George is one of those 1990 players, so he's out. So there are young guys available to trade to the Pelicans for Anthony Davis would have been like Rakeem Christmas, Joe Young, Georges Niang, Glenn Robinson III, and Miles Turner. That's got to be the least appealing package ever. If you're, I forget who was in charge, Del Demps, I think, of the Pelicans at the time of their front office, right? Why on earth would they even consider that? So even if Paul George came to the Pacers and said, hey, Anthony Davis is willing to play for our team. He wants to team up with me. That's great. They could have tried their hardest. They could have invested every dollar they wanted into trying to get him and traded 4 picks and 3 swaps. That probably wasn't enough to get Anthony Davis at the time. They didn't have the ammo to do it with the young pieces that they had because they bungled draft picks before. That's the more interesting part of this is if they had nailed picks leading up to this point, maybe they would have had the ammo to trade for Anthony Davis at this exact time to get him to their team, to lure him away. Maybe that's more an interesting discussion, but they traded a first for Thad right before that, the 2015 draft. Like, they did not do well in drafts leading up to this season outside, basically, of PG and Miles. And they traded a pick for Thad. So, like, they didn't have the young core to even do this. I think that is the lost part of this discussion. Because if the Pacers said, no, we don't want him, like, that is, it's foolish to think they would even think like that. Every team inquires about every player always. So, that it's silly to think to me that they would have just written it off. Now, is it possible? Yeah, I've never actually directly asked anyone, hey, did you guys just write off the idea of trading for Anthony Davis? But I think it's silly, completely outrageous to think that they just said, nope, we can't. Sorry, Paul. But either way, that is, according to him, something that contributed to him thinking that the team was, not as serious about winning as he thought. And part of why he asked out. Anthony Davis got traded for a bigger package than what the Pacers could have offered 2 years later when he had lower value at age 26. It is what it is. It didn't happen. But thinking back on the what if part, this is supposed to be fantasy land and not just a history lesson. What if the Pacers could have traded for Anthony Davis? So I will say this team would have been better than anything that could have happened with Oladipo and Sabonis. Anthony Davis is a beast. Him and Paul George would be an insane combo, like insane. The rest of the team would have been terrible because they wouldn't have had a lot of stuff to. I mean, they would have had a little bit of space, I suppose. Like they signed more history lessons for you. They signed Darren Collison and Bojan Bogdanovic that summer, if you remember correctly, and ended up rolling over a bunch of cap space for the next year where they were able to get McDermott and Tyreek Evans. But they would have had some space, but their team basically would have been, PG and Anthony Davis and whoever they got at point guard. They probably wouldn't have signed Bojan because they don't need wings if they have PG and Lance on the team. They would not have been a good team outside of those two guys, but those two together would have been nasty enough that maybe it was worth it. I mean, maybe that would have been worth something to have those two guys on the team together. That's an insanely good duo. I think that duo would have had a higher ceiling than anything Depot and Sabonis ended up doing, but it's not possible. It's not something the Pacers could have actually done, I don't think, given what their team context was at the time. So that what if, they would have been amazing. What if they could have pulled it off? Yeah, they could have been one of the best teams in the East for a year or two. Anthony Davis only had a few years left on his deal at the time. Paul George only had 1 year left on his deal at the time. They basically would have been an experiment for a year. That's another factor, right? Was it actually a rental to trade for Anthony Davis in that way? So what if? Yeah, they could have been a terror for a year. They could have been a terror for 2 years, 3 years, who knows? But probably not something long-term sustainable, and it would have been hard for them to build a team around them. But it would have been really sick. It also was not possible at all. So today's what if is mostly just me looking back on Paul George exit trades and thinking about how impressive it is that the offer that all of us thought at the time was not very good, including myself. I wrote about the trade and this was back when I was writing trade grade pieces on 8.9 seconds. I think I gave it a C minus. The Victor Oladipo, Domantas Sabonis return ended up being better than anything they could have actually done. That was actually possible and on the table for them. Maybe there was something else I missed in this research assignment, because this is about right when I started actually covering basketball. Was about when this trade happened. So if you think I missed something, hey, comment down below on YouTube or tweet at me at TEastNBA or at Locked On Pacers for this podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed today's show. Tomorrow, ex-NBA player, I'll just say who it is now, Antonio Daniels, top 4 pick, former NBA champion, is going to join us to talk about Rick Carlisle, what he can do to maximize a young Pacers team, Ben Mathurin, what it's like being a top pick, what his mindset needs to be this coming season. It's a fun conversation. You don't want to miss it. So thank you guys a ton for listening. Have a great day, and we will see you tomorrow.